The grand spiral chamber shimmered with the customary orchestration of light and sound. Elders from 1,000 species exchanged ritual greetings, their voices rising and falling in predictable cadences. Trade disputes, resource allocations, ceremonial posturing. Nothing unexpected, nothing dangerous. I had observed this theater countless cycles, yet this day began like any other, until the sensor screamed. Red warning glyphs pulsed across my viewport, a violent contrast against the serene, polished expanse of the chamber. Fold space readings spiked. The signal wasn't a disturbance, it was arrival. Human vessels, unannounced. Their trajectories perfect, disciplined, yet every hull bore the scars of infernos, rips in metal, and streaks of what our xenobiologists identified as dried biological residue. At first, the council murmured among itself, speculating refugees, survivors from some distant conflict we had deemed insignificant. I leaned forward, claws bracing against the observation rail, heart, or what approximated it in my species, thudding. Silence enveloped the human formation. No distress calls, no ceremonial approach, just motionless, resolute ships gliding toward the central platform. It was a language we did not understand, yet it communicated authority. Their presence radiated something primitive and terrifying, endurance. From my vantage point as a Varelian observer, I scrutinized every detail. The leading ship's plating was scorched black along the edges, patches of hull gouged and scarred as if clawed by the void itself. Our historians, who prided themselves on cataloging galactic fragility, had always whispered that humans were delicate, short-lived, prone to erratic emotions. Yet here they were, wounded, battered, unbroken. Each mark spoke volumes of survival, of unflinching resolve. The chamber's chatter ceased. Every eye, tentacle, and optical sensor focused on them. The humans did not descend with etiquette, nor with apology. They aligned their lead vessel with the council platform like a predator marking territory, calm but unyielding. The air, if it can be called that in this vacuum-simulated hall, thickened with tension. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council felt small, fragile, irrelevant. I felt a pulse of unease coil in my thorax. They were not vessels of retreat, they were vessels of return. The scars they bore were not wounds of surrender, but of endurance, proof that they had faced annihilation and lived. What horrors had they encountered? What fires had they endured? And most pressing, why had they arrived without permission, without explanation, without ceremony? A murmur spread like a contagion. Senior delegates exchanged glances. Their composite eyes reflected fear and fascination. Protocols, centuries in the making, crumbled in the face of silent defiance. We had no choice but to watch. The humans waited, patient, unwavering, as though the chamber itself existed only to witness their arrival. I recorded everything, knowing my reports would be dissected by scholars who would spend lifetimes speculating, theorizing, rationalizing. But observation could not contain the instinctive dread gnawing at me. These beings were not here to plead or negotiate. They were here to assert something beyond our comprehension. And as their formations settled into the central alignment, I realized a chilling truth. We were not welcoming survivors. We were encountering a species that had endured horrors enough to redefine the galaxy's understanding of resilience. The chamber waited, silent, breathless, and so did I. Why would a species so young arrive without permission and without apology? The question burned in every mind, unspoken yet undeniable. The grand spiral chamber had descended into a strange, tense paralysis. Protocols, the elaborate sequences of approval, greeting, and diplomatic courtesy, ground to a halt. The human ships hovered, unyielding, their blackened hulls etched with scars, as though the void itself had tried to claim them. And in that stillness, memories surfaced, bitter and accusing. We had misjudged them. Entire generations of scholars, diplomats, and strategists had dismissed humanity as a curiosity, persistent, noisy, and ultimately insignificant. They were late arrivals to the galactic stage, emerging from a world ravaged by constant storms, seismic upheavals, and ceaseless internal conflict. A planet that should have broken them, yet they endured. We had allowed them trade access, a nominal presence in the outer rim, but barred them from military councils, barred them from strategy and command. They were observers, not participants, a footnote in the annals of the galaxy. And now they hung before us, utterly unbowed. My thorax coiled with shame. Every data channel flickered as human transmissions bled into the chamber's networks. Battle telemetry, casualty manifests, emergency logs, streams of raw, unfiltered experience. They had not come seeking pity. They had come to inform. The stories unfolded, encounters with the Korath Devourers, a species we had catalogued only in myth, extinction-grade predators that had erased civilizations whole, leaving nothing but whispers and debris. Humanity had faced them alone, and we, the Council, had ignored their warnings as paranoia. What followed defied every equation, every model, every strategic forecast we had built over millennia. Human fleets fought without a retreat doctrine. They adapted mid-battle, converting debris into armor, improvising weapons from wreckage. Evacuation vessels became barricades, hospitals became mobile armories. They bled, not only their ships but themselves, yet they continued their advance. I could not comprehend it. My species had known war, yes, but never the scale, the desperation, the absolute refusal to surrender. Humans did not fight to win. They fought because surrender was a concept foreign to their psyche. To them, defeat was impossible, not because of technology or numbers, but because survival demanded defiance. Council delegates whispered, their compound eyes reflecting horror and fascination. Data analysts calculated probability over and over, yet the human record mocked them. They had survived encounters that should have annihilated them, outlasted forces that have erased entire fleets, and returned to our chamber with nothing but scars and a quiet, unshakable authority. I leaned closer to the viewport, unable to look away. Each hull, each mark of flame and impact was a testament not only to survival, but to an unyielding will. These beings were no longer the footnotes we had written them to be. They were authors of their own destiny, and of ours, if we dared to listen. Yet one question burned through the silence of the chamber, echoing in every mind. How had they survived when others, more experienced, more numerous, vanished without trace? The air, or its simulation, trembled with the weight of that question, and the answer, whatever it might be, seemed capable of unraveling every assumption the Council had ever made. The chamber remained silent for cycles too long to measure. Not a word, not a signal, not a twitch of the Council delegates. And then the human ambassador moved, slowly, deliberately. No shouting, no displays of fury. Exhaustion radiated from their posture, from the way their hands gripped the rail of the observation deck. Their helmet retracted with a hiss, revealing eyes dulled by grief, eyes that had witnessed the unimaginable and survived, yet carried the weight of every life lost. Images flickered into the chamber, projected without request or explanation. Colonies reduced to skeletal ruins, moons shattered into drifting debris, mass graves floating silently through the void, humanity's casualties laid bare for all to see. The holographic visuals were too precise, too raw. Every species present recoiled. This was no mere war footage. These were civilian worlds erased, obliterated to buy time, to stall the devourers, to survive one more day. A knot of something unfamiliar, guilt, twisted in my thorax. We had dismissed humanity as fragile, insignificant, and yet here they stood, showing us the price of our disbelief. The ambassador's voice was steady, calm, but it carried an unshakable authority that trembled in the very air of the chamber. We chose to stand alone, they said, not because we believed we could win. They explained the unimaginable. Farmers, engineers, artists, all transformed into soldiers, shields, and saviors. Each human vessel was more than a ship. It was a hospital, an armory, a tomb. Evacuation bays became infirmaries. Hull breaches vented not just air, but lives. They refused to sanitize the evidence. The blood on their ships was a testimony, not a stain to be erased. As the images scrolled past, it became painfully clear. They had not sought to impress or intimidate us. They had sought to teach. Every hologram, every casualty count, every shredded world was a lesson. Hesitation has a cost. A pause, a doubt, a delay. It all meant death. The ambassador's gaze swept the chamber, touching each species with a quiet accusation. "We want you to see it," they said. For the first time in recorded memory, the Galactic Council did not judge humanity. Humanity judged the Council. The weight of that judgment pressed down on every elder, every historian, every diplomat present. And in that oppressive silence, one question burned brighter than any projection. What demand could possibly follow such an accusation? The chamber waited, the humans waited, and we realized that the answer would redefine the galaxy forever. Expectations hung in the chamber like a tangible mist. The Council had anticipated pleas, entreaties for alliance, perhaps demands for weapons or resources. anything but what came next. Humanity's ambassador stepped forward with a measured grace, projecting authority without a trace of arrogance. Their request was singular, precise, and utterly unprecedented. Access. Full military and strategic access to every defense network, every command node, every contingency plan maintained by the Council. A shockwave rolled through the chamber. Delegates blinked their compound eyes, mandibles clicking involuntarily. Never had such authority been offered, not to the founders, not to the oldest species in the galaxy. Humanity, still classified as Tier 3, had been denied even a seat at strategic councils, dismissed as fledgling observers. And yet here they stood, demanding trust in the most extreme form imaginable. The ambassador said nothing further, yet the projection behind them spoke volumes. A countdown. The devourers were regrouping beyond mapped space. Humanity's delaying actions had bought months, nothing more, and that time was bleeding away. No pleas, no negotiations, just a stark warning. "Give us your defenses," the ambassador said, voice steady, unflinching. The calmness of the statement was almost unbearable. There was no panic, no desperation, only a resolute clarity that made the air itself tremble. It became apparent that humanity was not begging. They were not desperate. They were resolved. They had endured horrors that would have broken other species, and yet they were prepared to continue the war alone, without a shred of hesitation. I observed the blood-stained hulls, the battle scars, the ghostly projections of shattered human colonies. These were not victories, they claimed. They were debts paid in lives, proof of a commitment beyond any measure we had understood. A ripple of fear coursed through the chamber. If humanity failed, none of the Council would survive. If they succeeded, the balance of galactic power would shift irrevocably. Every strategy, every alliance, every assumption we had relied upon teetered on a knife's edge. And in that silence, a single terrifying thought emerged. Could we, the architects of complacency, the judges of fragility, trust a species forged by suffering to lead us? Could we hand over the keys of survival to those who had learned to endure when everything else had fallen? The chamber held its breath. Humanity waited. And I, a witness from afar, realized that this moment would define the galaxy's future, or end it entirely. The vote passed in a blur of tentacle twitches, optical blinks, and collective hesitation, the narrowest margin in the Council's millennia-long history. Humanity assumed command, and the chamber, for the first time, was no longer a place of ceremonial pomp. It became a theater of impending war, a stage on which a species we had long dismissed would rewrite the rules of survival. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then chaos descended. Not the panicked chaos of unpreparedness, but precise, terrifying chaos. Human tacticians accessed our databases and contingency protocols with an ease that made experienced strategists reel. Within hours, centuries-old doctrines of fleet formation, planetary defense, and engagement strategy were dismantled and rewritten. Fleets were repositioned to places our models had deemed indefensible. Civilian infrastructure, once sacrosanct, was weaponized to serve tactical purposes we had never conceived, never sanctioned. Preemptive strikes were authorized against zones we would have considered ethical nightmares, and yet it worked. I observed from the upper observation deck as alien admirals scrambled to adapt, their compound eyes wide, segmented limbs trembling with disbelief. Losses mounted immediately. Worlds were temporarily abandoned. Communication arrays fell silent. Orbital defenses evaporated in seconds. Human commanders responded not with panic, but with grim encouragement. Each word carried a weight of certainty that was alien to us. I began to understand something profound. Humans did not operate under the assumption that survival was guaranteed. They assumed failure, yet moved forward regardless. That mindset, alien in its defiance of probability, made them extraordinarily dangerous. They were not reckless. They were unbound by the limits our minds had accepted as absolute. Lines once considered hopeless became defensive bulwarks. Collapsed sectors were reinforced with minimal resources. Evacuation routes were converted into choke points. Hospitals became armories. Debris fields became shields. Alien fleets, disciplined and precise, held positions previously thought impossible under our old doctrines, because humans had not only adapted, they had anticipated. Hope,
A fragile and nearly extinct emotion among the council began to pulse in the chamber. Delegates whispered it under their breath, reluctant to believe that survival might still be possible.
Worlds that had been written off as doomed flickered back into viability. Entire sectors of space, once abandoned, were reclaimed with a precision that bordered on prescient. And always, the humans moved forward, eyes unwavering, voices steady, commanding without hesitation. Yet even as hope surged, a quiet unease grew. Every victory carried a cost. Every strategic gain demanded sacrifices that no species, not even humanity, could endure indefinitely without toll. Ships burned, lives were lost, planets scarred, and the Council, accustomed to measured outcomes and distant statistics, realized that hope always demanded payment. Watching them, I felt a mix of awe and terror. The humans, wounded and relentless, were not merely fighting to survive. They were rewriting the laws of war, and in doing so, had thrust the galaxy into an entirely new reality. For the first time in living memory, the outcome of survival was uncertain, and for the first time, the Council understood that they were not merely observers. They were participants in a war led by a species that refused to yield. The humans did not pause, did not plead, did not look back. Every maneuver, every sacrifice was part of a larger plan, incomprehensible to us, but executed with terrifying efficiency. And yet, we clung to hope, fragile as it was, knowing that it came at a cost. But as the battles raged on, the shadow of that cost loomed ever larger. Every victory would demand payment, every line held would claim lives, and every tactical advantage would extract a price in blood. Hope had returned to the galaxy, but at what expense? And in that realization, the chamber fell silent again, waiting for the next move of the humans who had taken command. The Perseus void stretched before us, a cold, inky chasm that had long been avoided by even the most daring scouts. But today, it became the stage for the galaxy's most desperate gambit. Sensors flared with warnings. Alien minds recoiled at the incoming storm of devourers, numbers so vast, so beyond any predictive model, that it was impossible to comprehend. Fleet after fleet of monstrous shapes surged from the void, hunger in every motion, annihilation encoded in every strike. Even with human command, even with our most sophisticated warships arrayed, defeat seemed inevitable. And then the humans acted. I watched with a mixture of awe and horror as their final contingency unfolded with cold precision.
Months prior, they had seeded gravitational kill zones throughout the void, mapping them with an obsessive foresight that bordered on obsession. Human colonies, already lost or deemed irrecoverable, became living lures. They stripped planets to their cores, evacuated what could be saved, and transformed the rest into instruments of war. Entire worlds they had called home, that bore their history, their culture, their ancestors, were sacrificed to the void. Stars themselves were detonated, not with subtlety, but with raw, overwhelming force. The laws of physics warped beneath their designs. Massive energy waves surged through the void, bending light, gravity, and space itself into patterns that the devourers could not anticipate. We, the alien observers, could only register the scale of the destruction and attempt to comprehend its purpose. And then, it struck me, they were erasing their own history to save the galaxy. Homes, cities, archives, libraries, gone. Every loss calculated, every sacrifice deliberate. They treated death as a tool, a necessity, a payment demanded by survival itself. The human fleets pressed the devourers into these traps with unflinching precision. Evacuations became ambushes. Evacuations became shields. Debris fields became armories. Every action carried the weight of mortality and intent, intertwined. Minutes, perhaps hours, passed in suspended disbelief. I recorded the devastation, my own mind struggling to catalog a level of tactical ingenuity and ruthlessness we had never seen. And then, the void stilled. The devourers, the monsters that had erased civilizations before ours even registered their existence, were gone. Silence reclaimed the space, a hollow, tremulous quiet that seemed almost sacrilegious. But the cost was staggering.
millions of humans, those who had orchestrated, executed, and endured the battle, had vanished. Their fleets, their worlds, their lives, all claimed in the calculus of survival. Their ships floated, hollowed, blood-stained, and silent. The galaxy had been spared, but at a price no record could fully convey. Council delegates, long hardened to reports of war, stared in awe and revulsion. The humans had rewritten the meaning of sacrifice. They had leveraged everything, history, identity, life itself, against extinction. And yet, there was no celebration, no fanfare, no recognition, only the empty echo of what had been lost. Victory had been achieved. The devourers were gone.
Humanity had survived, at least in fragments, but the price carved into the stars, into the planets, into the very void itself, left a permanent scar across the galaxy's conscience. And in that silence, a question loomed, unspoken but unavoidable. Victory had come, yes, but at what cost to the galaxy's soul? The Perseus void remained, silent and unforgiving, a tomb and a monument alike. And the Council understood, perhaps for the first time, that some victories demand more than mere survival. They demand everything. The grand spiral chamber reconvened in silence. No bells tolled, no ceremonial lights glimmered. The Council, still reeling from the events at the Perseus Void, moved with a caution that bordered on awe. Human fleets drifted into position beyond the chamber's observation ports, battered and scarred, yet unbowed. Their ships bore the stains of battle and loss, blood, soot, and shell, but their formation remained disciplined, unyielding. Each vessel seemed to whisper the truth the chamber had yet to fully grasp. These beings had survived when nothing else could. The ambassador returned to the council podium. Time had etched itself into his frame. Movements, once fluid, were now measured, deliberate. His eyes held the weight of uncountable losses, of countless decisions that had demanded more than any species should bear. He did not demand recognition. He did not seek gratitude. There was no plea, no threat, no posture of triumph, only presence. He spoke once, softly, carrying more gravity than the chamber could contain. I recorded the words in the official archives, altering the descriptors that had long defined humanity. They were no longer persistent, a term we had applied lightly, dismissively. They were indomitable. Every historian in the room, every archivist, every chronicler would now be compelled to acknowledge that the humans were a species forged in fire, refined by loss, and tempered by an unyielding will. The blood on their ships had not been cleaned. It would not be cleaned. It was a warning to any species foolish enough to underestimate them, and the chamber understood it intuitively. This was both testament and threat, a living record of the price of survival and the consequences of misjudgment. As I observed the ambassador, I realized that the human return to the council was not about power, nor about revenge. It was about legacy. Their purpose was to ensure that the galaxy remembered, that we never dismissed resilience when it appeared in its rawest, most unpolished form. Every species in the chamber adjusted their assumptions, recalibrated their doctrines, reconsidered the meaning of courage. The humans had shifted the paradigm, not with rhetoric or ceremony, but with action. And yet, the question lingered, echoing through the corridors and observation decks. What place does a species capable of such extremes hold in a galaxy now teetering toward peace? The chamber remained silent. The humans remained silent. And I, tasked with recording this moment for posterity, understood that history had changed, but its consequences had yet to be fully realized. Years had passed, yet the scars remained, not just on planets, moons, and fleets, but etched into the memory of the galaxy itself. Humanity held no throne, claimed no dominion,
Their fleets did not patrol for conquest, nor did their emissaries parade through council halls demanding recognition. Instead, they moved quietly along the borders, maintaining vigilance over sectors that had once been considered lost, rebuilding what could be salvaged, and preparing silently for threats that others would scarcely believe could return. And still, when a human spoke, every species listened. Council delegates, historians, and strategists paused to hear them, weighing each word not merely for content, but for the weight of a history no simulation could capture. Even the youngest species, those who had never witnessed the devastation at Perseus, learned of the day the blood-stained ships arrived and saved us all. Holorecords and educational archives displayed shattered hulls, charred colonies, and fractured moons, but they also recorded courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice in a narrative that no algorithm could fully render. I, an alien who had once dismissed them as persistent but inconsequential, now sit at the edge of these archives and write history differently. Humans are not special because they possess the strongest weapons, the fastest ships, or the deadliest tactics. No, they are special because they endure when logic says they should fall. They thrive in the margins of probability, defy extinction when all calculations predict annihilation, and transform despair into action.
And when they arrive wounded, their ships blackened, their bodies bearing the scars of combat, silent and unafraid, I know with certainty that the universe itself has been gifted another day, a day in which survival is not guaranteed, but is made possible by a species whose resilience reshapes the very definition of endurance. The Council's records will always carry the blood-stained ships, the images of the Devourer's retreat, and the names of those who did not return. But beyond documentation, beyond analysis, the lesson is clear. Humanity's legacy is not conquest or dominion, it is survival against all odds. Their existence and the choices they made in the face of annihilation ensure that the galaxy continues for at least one more cycle, and perhaps countless more. I close the archives with a reverence I have never felt for any other species. Every word, every record, every echo of that war serves as a reminder that the future, uncertain as it may be, remains because of humans. And so the blood-stained ships, silent sentinels of endurance, patrol the void. And wherever they go, wherever they linger, it is a signal to all: the universe is still capable of surviving. And as long as humans endure, so too does hope. The story of the blood-stained ships is no longer just a story of war. It is the chronicle of endurance, a testament to courage, and a living lesson to every species in the galaxy. When humans appear wounded, silent, and unafraid, it means the universe is about to survive another day.